in the vast blue distance between Hawaii and the Philippines, where the Pacific stretches for thousands of miles without interruption, there exists a nation made almost entirely of water. Land here is not the rule, but the exception. A scattering of slivers so narrow that a person standing at their center can often see the ocean on both sides at once. The islands rise barely a few feet above the surface, thin rings of coral and sand curved around lagoons the color of glass. From above, they look less like land than like stitches. Fine threads of green holding the ocean's blue fabric together. Up close, the impression does not change so much as intensify, a strip of palm and coral. And beyond it, everywhere, water. This is a place defined by extremes held closely together, vast ocean and vanishingly small land, ancient navigational knowledge and satellite weather warnings. A nation among the least responsible for a warming planet and among the first to feel its verdict. Lagoons here are calm enough to drink tea beside. The open ocean beyond the reef is wild enough to have humbled sailors for 3,000 years. But its true character lies not just in its geography, but in the people who have made a permanent home atop a foundation the sea has never fully agreed to. This is a story of a nation balanced between the ancient and the imperiled, between a culture built to read the ocean's every mood and a future in which the ocean's mood may simply erase the stage on which that culture performs. This is a story not of disappearance, but of persistence, of a people who have spent 100 generations learning to live with water on every side, and who are now being asked, with rising urgency, to prove that they can keep doing so. This is the Marshall Islands, the story of a nation learning to hold its ground on land that is, quite literally, disappearing beneath it. Wherever you are in the world, we want to hear from you. Comment your country below, and let us know where you're joining this journey from. In the Marshall Islands, the ocean is not scenery. It is architecture, calendar, and law. The atolls themselves are its creation, ancient volcanic peaks long since sunk beneath the waves, ringed by coral that grew steadily upward, chasing the sunlight, until only a necklace of reef and sand remained above the surface. Every inch of land here is, in the most literal sense, something the sea allowed to exist. That relationship shapes temperament as much as topography. Marshallese life runs on tides, not clocks, on the hour the reef exposes its fish traps, the moment the lagoon calms enough for a canoe to cross, the season the trade winds shift and bring the promise of rain. Elders read swells the way other cultures read weather maps. A certain cross pattern in the water once meant land was near, even when no land could be seen. That knowledge, called wave piloting, allowed ancient navigators to cross hundreds of miles of open water using nothing but the feel of the ocean beneath a canoe's hull. To live this close to the sea is to hold two truths without contradiction: that the water gives, in fish and salt, and the cooling breath of the trade winds, and that the water takes, in storms and surges, and increasingly in land itself. Marshallese temperament carries both, a patience born of dependence and a wariness born of respect. There is also a stillness particular to atoll life, a slowness that outsiders sometimes mistake for idleness, but that locals understand as calibration, moving at the pace the reef, the tide, and the sun allow, rather than the pace a clock demands. It is a temperament built not for haste, but for endurance. The Republic of the Marshall Islands is home to roughly 40,000 people, scattered across 29 atolls and 5 single islands, though barely half of those are permanently inhabited. It is one of the smallest nations on Earth by land area. Its total territory could be folded into a mid-sized American city. And yet its ocean territory, its exclusive economic zone, ranks among the largest in the world. That contradiction, enormous sea, minuscule land, produces a society of striking intimacy. On the outer atolls, communities may number only a few hundred people, and everyone within them is connected by blood, marriage, or both. Even in Majuro, the capital, where roughly half the nation's population is concentrated onto a narrow strip of land, a stranger rarely stays a stranger for long. Ask after someone's family, and there is a good chance the answer loops back, within 2 or 3 names, to someone you already know. This closeness is not incidental. On atolls with no more land than a few football fields end to end, isolation is simply not a workable way to live. Survival has always depended on cooperation, on everyone knowing, quite literally everyone. Daily life on the outer islands follows an unhurried, almost ceremonial rhythm. Mornings begin early. In the grey hour before the heat sets in, when fishermen push their canoes out past the reef and women begin sweeping the sandy paths between houses, a task performed daily, not out of necessity, but out of a quiet insistence on order. By mid-morning, the atoll's small trade store, often no larger than a single room, stocked with rice, tinned fish, batteries, and whatever the last field trip ship managed to bring, becomes a gathering point. News travels here before it travels anywhere else. Who caught what, whose relative is arriving on the next flight, which family is hosting a birthday feast this weekend. Greeting rituals matter deeply. The word iakwe, more than a simple hello, carries the sense of love and blessing offered between people who share both land and fate. It is said slowly, deliberately, often accompanied by a smile that lingers a beat longer than politeness alone requires. A small daily reaffirmation that, on an island this size, everyone's well-being is bound to everyone else's. If the atoll is the physical foundation of Marshallese life, the family is its social one. And in the Marshall Islands, family means something wider and deeper than the nuclear household familiar elsewhere. Land, still today, is passed down matrilineally, traced through the mother's line, with clan elders holding responsibility for how it is shared and used. A person's identity is inseparable from their bwai, their lineage, and from the particular strip of land their clan has stewarded for generations. Households frequently stretch across 3 or 4 generations under one roof, or across several roofs standing close enough together that the boundary between them blurs. Grandparents raise grandchildren as often as parents do. Cousins are called brothers and sisters without qualification. A child on a Marshallese atoll rarely lacks for supervision, affection, or correction. There are simply too many relatives nearby for a child to go unwatched. This extended structure is not sentiment, it is infrastructure. On land this limited, no single household could survive entirely alone. The family, in its broadest form, is the mechanism by which food, labor, land, and care are shared out across a community too small to afford anyone falling through the cracks. Elders occupy a position of particular authority within this structure. Their memory of past storms, past harvests, past disputes over land boundaries functions as a kind of living archive, consulted before major decisions the way other societies might consult a written record. To disregard an elder's counsel is considered not merely rude, but genuinely unwise. Is that shared obligation more visible than in the Kamem, the elaborate first birthday celebration held for a child's turn to 1 year old, a milestone considered? In a place where infant mortality was once dangerously common, a genuine triumph worth marking with the whole community's effort. Preparations begin weeks in advance. Extended family arrives from other islands, sometimes from as far as the United States, bringing money, food, and labor. Pigs are raised and slaughtered, breadfruit is gathered and pit-baked in earth ovens. Women weave mats and prepare handicrafts as gifts. On the day itself, tables sag under the weight of communal cooking. And the family hosting the Kamem is, paradoxically, expected to give more than they receive, sending guests home with plates, gifts, and leftovers as a gesture of abundance. The Kamem is, at its heart, a mutual aid system disguised as a party. Families who host one today will be guests contributing to someone else's next month, and the next, and the one after that, an unbroken cycle of giving that ensures no single household ever bears a celebration or a hardship entirely alone. If there is one institution around which Marshallese community life truly orbits, it is the church. Christianity arrived with missionaries in the 19th century and took root so completely that today the nation is overwhelmingly Christian. Its Sunday rhythms observed with a seriousness that borders on civic law. Many shops on the outer islands simply do not open on the Sabbath. But the church here functions as more than a place of worship. It is town hall, concert venue, counseling office, and social safety net rolled into one modest building, often the largest and best maintained structure on the entire atoll. Congregations organize relief after storms, coordinate school fundraisers, and settle community disputes with as much authority as any government office in Majuro. Sunday singing, in particular, carries a force that visitors often describe as overwhelming, full-throated harmony rising from a building with open windows and no air conditioning, carried outward across the lagoon on the evening breeze. It is, in every practical sense, the third place the Marshallese cannot do without. The room where the whole community, without exception, is expected to show up. Long before satellite navigation, Marshallese seafarers charted the ocean using stick charts, intricate lattices of coconut midribs and corai shells that mapped not coastlines, but the subtle patterns of ocean swell bending around islands far over the horizon. These charts were never carried to sea. They were memorized, studied, then left behind. The knowledge transferred entirely into the navigator's body and instinct. That same instinct for encoding memory into craft runs through much of Marshallese tradition. Women weave jakied, finely patterned mats once so valuable they served as currency and dowry, their geometric designs passed from mother to daughter, along with the stories those patterns represent. Storytelling, or buebuenato, remains a living art, histories, genealogies, and warnings folded into narrative and repeated at gatherings, ensuring that even in a largely oral culture, nothing essential is ever truly lost. Language itself carries this weight. Marshallese has words for wave patterns, wind shifts, and reef conditions with no direct English equivalent, a vocabulary built, quite literally, for survival on the water, and a reminder that this culture's deepest knowledge was never written down so much as spoken, sung, and sailed. The Marshallese carry a history heavier than their small landmass might suggest. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons on and above Bikini and Enewetak atolls, including the Castle Bravo test, at the time the most powerful nuclear device ever exploded, its fallout spreading across inhabited islands far beyond the intended test zone. Entire communities were relocated, some permanently, their ancestral land rendered uninhabitable for generations. Bikini's people moved off their atoll with promises of return, have in large part still not gone home. It is a history discussed here with remarkable restraint, acknowledged plainly, taught to children, memorialized each March on Nuclear Victims' Remembrance Day, but rarely dwelt upon with bitterness in daily conversation. That restraint is its own form of strength. The Marshallese have absorbed one of the 20th century's heaviest burdens and continued, without spectacle, to build lives, raise families, and hold their culture together, a quiet endurance that asks for acknowledgement more than sympathy. When the day's heat breaks, outrigger canoe racing draws entire communities to the shoreline. The traditional wallap and smaller corker canoes, built with hulls shaped by techniques passed down through generations of canoe builders, skim across the lagoon under sail, their crews leaning hard against the wind in a discipline that is as much inherited memory as athletic skill. Basketball and volleyball, introduced more recently, have taken firm root as well, makeshift courts, often little more than packed sand, with a hoop bolted to a coconut trunk. Host games that draw spectators from across the atoll, but it is canoe racing that carries the deepest cultural weight, a direct, living link to the seafaring skill that once let Marshallese navigators cross open ocean other cultures dared not attempt. Whether on water or sand, these games serve the same social function everywhere they are played: pride, rivalry, and belonging distilled into an afternoon, cheered on by grandparents who remember when the canoes were the only way anyone traveled at all. For most of Marshallese history, the economy has been the atoll itself. Reef fish, caught by net, spear, and trap, supplied daily protein. Coconut supplied oil, food, rope, and thatch. Pandanus and breadfruit, both harvested and preserved through traditional drying and fermenting methods, carried communities through leaner seasons. Land was never bought or sold in the modern sense. It was inherited, worked, and shared according to clan responsibility. Copra, dried coconut meat, pressed for oil, became the island's first true export in the colonial era and remains, on outer atolls, one of the few reliable sources of cash income. Sacks of copra, cut and dried by hand, are still loaded onto the field trip ships that connect the outer islands to Majuro every few weeks. Exchanged for the store-bought staples, rice, sugar, flour, that have become woven into daily meals. This traditional economy was never about accumulation. It was about sufficiency. Enough fish for the week, enough copra for the next supply run, enough shared labor to keep every household fed, regardless of how the reef happened to be running that season. In Maduro, the global economy is not a distant rumor. It stands in plain sight. In shipping containers stacked along the port, in the tuna processing plant that anchors much of the formal economy, in the government offices and small businesses that employ a significant share of the capital's workforce. Under the Compact of Free Association with the United States, remittances and federal assistance flow steadily into the country, funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that a nation this size could not otherwise sustain. Yet travel 45 minutes by small plane to an outer atoll, and that modern economy recedes almost to nothing. There, subsistence fishing and copra production remain the practical backbone of daily life, and a single grocery run means waiting on a supply ship's schedule rather than driving to a store. The Marshall Islands, in this sense, exists in two economies at once. One modern, monetized, and dependent on outside support, the other ancient, self-sufficient, and largely unchanged for centuries, with most families moving fluidly, out of necessity, between both. The center of the Marshallese table sits a quiet negotiation between old and new. Rice, cheap and shelf-stable, has become the daily staple, often paired with reef fish grilled simply over an open fire, a meal that would be recognizable to islanders a century ago, aside from the rice itself. Breadfruit, roasted whole in its skin until the flesh turns soft and faintly sweet, remains a comfort food reached for at gatherings and quiet evenings alike. Coconut appears in nearly everything, grated into local dishes, pressed into oil, drunk straight from the shell as the day's simplest refreshment. Alongside it sits an unmistakable colonial and wartime inheritance, tinned corned beef and spam, ubiquitous enough to have become genuine comfort foods in their own right, folded into local cooking rather than resisted as foreign. Meals are rarely private affairs. Food here is prepared in quantities meant for sharing. Plates pass between households as a matter of course, the table functioning less as a boundary than as an open door. Tradition and imported convenience sitting comfortably side by side on the same woven mat. On celebration days, the earth oven itself becomes the centerpiece, a shallow pit lined with hot stones filled with breadfruit, pig, and fish, sealed under leaves and sand to cook slowly for hours. When it is finally opened, the released steam carries a smell of smoke, salt, and sweetness that neighbors 3 houses down can recognize instantly for what it means. Today, everyone eats together. To walk across a Marshallese atoll is to walk, in some places, from one ocean to the other in a matter of minutes. The path leads beneath a canopy of coconut palms leaning uniformly toward the sea, past breadfruit trees heavy with green fruit, past pandanus with its spiraled crown of blade like leaves. Underfoot, coral rubble gives way to soft sand, then back to rubble. The ground itself a record of the reef's long, slow labor. On the lagoon side, the water lies flat and warm, clear enough to see fish moving between coral heads meters below the surface. Cross to the ocean side, sometimes only 100 meters distant, and the character changes entirely. waves break hard against exposed reef, spray carrying on wind that never fully stops. Between these two shores, life unfolds. Children playing in the shallows, women cleaning fish on a wooden plank, men repairing nets in the shade of a breadfruit tree. There is a particular quality of light here in the late afternoon, gold, low and unfiltered, that turns the lagoon the color of hammered metal and makes the whole narrow strip of land feel, briefly, like the only solid thing in an otherwise liquid world. The air itself carries a distinct layered scent, salt first, then the sweetness of overripe pandanus fallen from its branch, then wood smoke drifting from a cooking fire somewhere out of sight. Even the sound changes by the hour, the sharp calls of seabirds at dawn, the murmur of conversation and clattering pots at midday, and by dusk, the steady, unbroken percussion of surf against the outer reef. A sound so constant that long-time residents say they no longer hear it. Only its absence, on the rare still day, draws their attention. From one part of the Marshall Islands to another remains, even now, a genuine undertaking. The government's field trip ships, the primary lifeline connecting Majuro to the outer atolls, run on schedules measured in weeks rather than days, carrying passengers, mail, fuel, and supplies across open ocean that can turn rough with little warning. A missed sailing can mean waiting a month for the next. Small propeller planes cover some of the same routes faster, landing on short coral airstrips that double outside of flight hours as the community's soccer field. But plane seats are limited and costly, and weather can ground them without notice. Leaving the ship as the more dependable, if slower, option, alongside these modern systems, the older ways persist where they must. Outrigger canoes still cross lagoon waters for short trips between islets. On some outer atolls, sailing canoes remain a practical necessity rather than a ceremonial relic. Modern engines and ancient sailcraft share the same lagoon, often within sight of each other, each suited to a different scale of journey. Across all of it, the church and the container ship, the stick chart and the satellite phone, the copra sack and the remittance transfer, a single balance persists. Tradition here has not been replaced by modern life so much as folded into it, the two running alongside one another rather than in opposition. This is not a culture frozen in the past, nor one that has abandoned it. It is one that has learned, out of necessity as much as instinct, which old practices remain useful and which new tools are worth adopting. Keeping the wave reading and the weaving, the kamem and the church, while accepting the rice, the outboard motor, and the compact funding that keeps hospitals running. That balance is not static. It shifts, atoll by atoll, generation by generation. But it has held, in one form or another, for longer than most nations on Earth have existed at all. Marshallese children learn to swim before they are steady on land. A practical necessity in a place where the lagoon is often closer than the nearest road. By adolescence, many can identify fish species by silhouette, read an incoming swell, and handle a canoe with an ease that looks to outsiders almost effortless. Formal education, however, increasingly pulls in a different direction. Secondary schooling on the outer islands is limited, pushing many teenagers to Majuro, or further still, to boarding schools and colleges in the United States, made accessible by the Compact of Free Associations provisions allowing Marshallese citizens to live and work there without a visa. Large diaspora communities have taken root in places like Springdale, Arkansas, so substantial that it is sometimes called, with a mix of pride and irony, the second largest Marshallese community on Earth. For young people, the pull is real in both directions, toward opportunity, wages and education abroad, and toward the atoll, the language, the family land, and the particular kind of belonging that exists nowhere else. Many leave, many also return, eventually drawn back by something harder to name than economics. The rhythm of an atoll day is built around the sun's punishing height. Mornings and late afternoons carry the heaviest labor, fishing, gathering, cooking over open fire, mending nets and roofs, while the hottest midday hours are, by long custom, reserved for rest in whatever shade a breadfruit tree or thatched lean-to can provide. As the light softens toward evening, the mood shifts. Families gather on woven mats outside their homes, plates passed and shared, conversation unhurried. Guitars, common on nearly every atoll, accompany singing that drifts easily between hymn and local folk song. Children chase each other along the shoreline until the light fails entirely. Adults linger longer, voices low against the sound of surf on the reef. Night itself arrives with a darkness now rare in much of the world. No ambient city glow to dull it, only starlight dense enough to steer by. A nightly reminder of the very sky the old navigators once read to find their way home. No honest account of the Marshall Islands can avoid the pressure now bearing down on it. The nation's average elevation sits at roughly 2 meters above sea level, among the lowest of any country on Earth. And king tides, the seasonal peak of ocean surge, now regularly flood roads, homes, and even the runway in Majuro, salting freshwater wells and gardens that took generations to establish. Seawalls, some built from coral rubble and concrete, others improvised from whatever material a family can gather. Line stretches of shoreline that were, within living memory, simply beach. Freshwater, always precious on land too narrow to hold large aquifers, grows more precious still as saltwater intrusion spreads. Emigration, driven by both economic pressure and climate anxiety, continues to draw young people abroad in numbers that outer island communities feel acutely. The questions this raises have no easy answers, and the Marshallese do not pretend otherwise. What does it mean to remain a nation if the land itself recedes? How does a culture built entirely around a particular reef, a particular lagoon, a particular horizon, carry itself forward if that specific geography no longer exists? These are not rhetorical exercises here. They are the substance of town hall meetings, church sermons, and international conferences alike. Government leaders have raised the possibility of elevated islands, engineered land, and, more controversially, planned relocation. Proposals that draw sharp disagreement even within Marshallese communities. For some, adaptation and engineering represent the only realistic path forward. For others, any conversation about leaving the atolls permanently feels like a concession the nation is not yet, and may never be, prepared to make. Given all of it, the isolation, the history, the rising water, the question arrives naturally, and without judgment. So why do people stay? They stay for the land, not merely as property, but as inheritance, identity, and obligation, a strip of coral and sand that carries a family's name and a clan's memory. They stay for the family, the grandparents who raised them, the cousins who are also siblings, The community that has never once let a household stand entirely alone. And above all, they stay for something harder to translate into any single word. A belonging to a particular ocean, a particular horizon, a particular way of reading the world that exists nowhere else on Earth, and that no relocation, however well-intentioned, could ever fully reproduce. Vast ocean, vanishingly small land. Ancient wave reading, satellite weather warnings. A history heavy enough to bend most nations, carried here without complaint. These contrasts, held together for 3,000 years, remain the truest description of what the Marshall Islands is. Not a paradox to be resolved, but a balance to be maintained. Tide after tide, generation after generation. The water may keep rising. The reef may keep shifting beneath new demands. But the songs still rise from the church on Sunday evenings. The stick charts are still taught to those who wish to learn them. And the kamem still gathers whole communities around a single child's first year of life. Whatever the ocean eventually decides about the land, it has not yet decided anything about the people who have always known, better than anyone, how to live upon the water's edge.